So first, welcome. Thanks for coming to Inflectra tonight to learn about real-world testing. So first thing, I've got a little agenda. So first introductions for the camera, for the recording. And what we're going to talk about first of all is how do you manage the testing process? And so we at Inflectra have some tools that we use and sell to customers to actually help them manage their testing and their requirements. So we're going to talk a little bit about requirements management, how it ties into the testing process, and how you can use that to do your manual testing, and also some of the other parts of testing you should be doing and how it fits together. We'll then have a short break, enjoy some of the cookies we have in the back part of the room, and then we'll talk about automation. And there are various parts of automation we'll be talking about, but we'll also be demonstrating in real life how you would do UI test automation, which is one of the trickiest and hardest parts of testing automation in many ways, when we've got some tools that can make it easier. And definitely your questions. So please, throughout this, ask your questions. We've got a question break at the end of the two sections as well, and you can ask us other questions afterwards. Okay, so first of all, what do we need to do first? So the first thing we have to do is figure out what our requirements are. I'm just going to move around. Oops, this way, so I can see you and talk at the same time. There we go. So basically what we need to do is define our requirements, and we then need to take those requirements and then figure out what is our test strategy to actually test them. And the other thing we want to talk about is tools. So when we begin, I'm just curious, what tools do you use today in your testing? Do you like managing your requirements in your testing? Do you use any tools today? HP Quality Center. And I know, right. So if you use HP Quality Center, this may look familiar in some ways. It's similar. Do you like HP Quality Center?
Not the way we use it. I don't think we use it to its full functionality.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Well, I'd be curious to get your feedback on what you see today and how it compares, what you like and what you don't like, and it would be helpful to give us some feedback on what we can improve. And maybe if there's ideas of things that we're showing you that you could use in Quality Center, that would be great too. So moving on, so what are the requirements? And requirements have sort of changed. Back in the day, there was you might write requirements in a huge document you gave to someone, a huge requirements matrix, functional requirements, system requirements, use cases, specifications. And some projects still do that. If they've got government requirements, they may have to do that. With move to agile methodologies, we're trying to make more requirements that are more agile, that are lighter, that you write just enough to be able to build something and test something, not creating paper for paper's sake. But whether they're user stories or whether they're use cases or they're screen mock-ups, ultimately those are requirements. You've got to test to something. And so how do we do testing if we don't know what we're starting with? And so that's why requirements is really important. So once we have our requirements, what do we do with them? We then have to figure out how we're going to build them, develop them, and test them and deploy them. And so this diagram goes through the different pieces. And it starts out with your requirements and user stories, and then we've got to figure out, well, we've got to write some code, do some design work. We build the code in Subversion or Git, whatever tool we're using, and then nowadays we typically can do continuous integration. We can build it all the time, and if we're lucky, and the technology lets us do that, we can have automated checks that are checking the application, doing automated testing all the time. And we also will take those requirements in parallel and write some basic requirement acceptance tests so that the end users can actually say, well, does this do what it's supposed to? Because the machine can check things, but the human has to make sure it actually meets the spirit of the user story. And the product owner will write the user story with the client, or maybe it is the client will be the one to make sure that's the case. There's also two things at the end that I put down which people often forget, and when we do our testing, some of us forget, which is that you've got to test on the actual environment. It's very easy for a developer to test on their environment, or we do the continuous integration, we build the application, and we test on the build server. We then deploy it onto customers' environments, and it works completely different, and that doesn't always work. And as Elise will tell you, there are many times when it works on all of our internal environments, but not on the customers. So it's important that we build good test environments. We do installation testing as well, making sure that we're testing everything that the user will have to experience, deploying the app, configuring the app, not just using it. And then the other thing we've got here at the top right is exploratory and session-based testing, other ways to test things that are outside of maybe the formal requirements, but they're ways to find the edge cases, find the things that you don't know to write down because you don't know them yet. And the other thing is, obviously, there's never enough time for testing. The first phase of this, we're going to talk about management. The second phase, we'll talk about automation. You can't necessarily automate everything, and you shouldn't try and automate everything. Automation is good. It captures a lot of the basic things, but it gives you a false sense of security. You always need to have time for manual testing. Any questions so far? Can you hear me okay, by the way? I'm not speaking too fast? Okay. If I do speak fast, just raise your hand, and I'll slow down. So we're going to talk about a real example, and we're going to use our tool, which is called SpiraTeam. And SpiraTeam does requirements management, test management, bug tracking, similar in many ways to HP, QC, ALM, if you're familiar with that. And it also does what a lot of separate smaller tools can do together. And what we'll do, and we're going to do it for real, so I hate PowerPoint, it's good to get this, set the stage, but I'd much rather show you it for real. So we've got this little sample application. It's just a simple web application using ASP.NET. It's a library application. You can log in, you can create a book, create an author, edit a book, and then you can link them together, create a new book and add a new book to the author. That's pretty much what it does, but it's a good test of a simple web test. The other thing we might need to test in real life would be some APIs. So we've got some REST APIs. We probably won't have time tonight to test those, but if we do, we could do that at the end. In many cases, APIs now are as important as the application because many things are microservices. All the apps we use, like Uber and Lyft, they require APIs to work. APIs become as important as the application. So that's the PowerPoint piece. Now we'll talk about the real application. So I'm going to escape out of PowerPoint. And this is the browser running, and we've got two tabs. So the first tab is SpiraTeam, which we'll be using to actually write our requirements and do our testing. And then this is the library application, which is a fake said library application. And just to show you what it does before we start testing it, you can log in. You can log in with a different username. So I can log in with librarian. Librarian like this, log in. You can go into the book management section. You can create a book. You can edit a book, create an author, edit an author. It's got some drop downs, it's got some text boxes. So again, simple little application, but it's good to get the fundamentals and the basics. So that's what we're doing. So now what we've done is we've got our project. This is SpiraTeam. And in SpiraTeam, what I did is I set up initially, just to be realistic, I set up a release. So we're going to create this new version. It's called 1.0 of our library system right here. And since it's an agile project, we're going to have two sprints, sprint 1 and sprint 2. For today, we're only going to deal with sprint 1. But in reality, you'll have different pieces of functionality that would be planned out in different sprints. And so the way it starts out with this, and this is a blank project, is you'll start out right here with requirements. And I created a functional requirements top level. And SpiraTeam is designed to work for both agile projects and traditional waterfall projects. So in the waterfall world, you would start out with requirements and you'd write them, literally start with your functional requirements, and then you'll have, for example, some features. So the first feature you might have would be we're going to need to be able to authenticate. So we'll have an authentication requirement like that. And obviously there are two parts, at least for the application as in its first version, is we have to be able to log in, and we have to be able to log out. So let's do the login one first. So we'll create a new char requirement called login to system, like that. We'll create another one called logout. So that's another requirement. And then we're going to have some functionality about creating books. So let's go in here, and we're going to have books. And we're going to create under that one a child requirement called create a book. So the user needs to be able to create a book. And there's different ways of writing requirements. I'm just doing them as a simple sentence. There are some formats for user stories that people like. On BDD, there's other formats. It's just however you would write them. We also can do use cases, which is where you have a set of steps, which describe exactly how you do it. That's another option as well. The user needs to be able to edit a book. Okay, and I'm just going to make that a little bit wider so we can see it. Okay, like that. Close those down. And actually, books should not be under authentication. That's not a problem. I'll just outdent it like that. There we go. Okay, and so we'll just do another set of requirements for authors, and then we'll do the test cases, authors. And the same thing here, we want to basically create the ability to create an author, to be able for user to create a new author, and same thing, edit an author. I'm not going to write test cases for all of these, but you get the idea. To edit an existing author. Okay, we'll just put those under there, like that. So we've now got some basic requirements. And what we could also want to do is, let's just go into one of them, but we might want to put more information. For example, when we say log in, what do we mean? Do we log in with like username and password? Do we use a special key token? So let's go in here, we'll just add the information. User logs in with username and password, say. The system locks the user after 5 incorrect tries. So you could either write those in the description, or you could create sub-requirements. That's up to you how you want to do things. There's different ways of using any system, so it's important to make sure you don't make too much work for yourself. Ultimately, each of these requirements is going to tie to a test case. So if you're going to have discrete test cases tying to a specific like locking functionality, you might want to make it a separate requirement, because then you can check the testing against it separately. If it's all one test case, maybe you can just have one requirement with bullets. But that's entirely up to you. And if you look at the ability to create a book, another thing you might want to do when you write a requirement is you might want to actually describe, for example, what information can be in there. So, for example, in this one here, user creating a book, what information does the user put in? There's the name of the book, there's the author, and the genre. So you can describe some of the elements. And it's important to write this down, because when you start to write your tests, unless you know what you're supposed to be able to do, it's very easy to say, did it pass, did it fail? And in an agile environment, these requirements may be changing, because the user might see this and go, well, when I see this requirement, it sounded good on paper, but when I actually get to it, it doesn't actually look so good anymore. So if I go back to logging in and creating a book, these are the 3 fields, but I'm missing the ISBN number. So in Agile, you'll often have a situation where you start to mock something up, you'll design it, your requirements are going to change, and that's okay. Any questions so far?
I have a few questions.
Okay.
So I know you're probably just trying to do this from a functional perspective, like breaking up into small components. But how can the test case live in more than one sort of a suite area?
Yeah, these requirements, the requirements of test cases are many-to-many relationship. So you definitely don't necessarily want to write one test case for each of these. And in fact, every one of these requirements should have multiple types of tests. You may have a simple unit test, which literally just tests logging in. You may have an integrated test, which is going to test the whole process, logging in, doing some stuff, logging out. You may have some exploratory tests, which tie back to several of the requirements. It's designed to be many-to-many. Absolutely. Any other questions, or are they kind of all connected to that?
A little bit. I'll let you finish how you're going to show.
Okay. And definitely, I'm showing you something of how you might set it up. There's many different ways. I'm just trying to keep it sort of simple to visualize. So definitely different people have used it in different ways. If, for example, I chose to do it by function requirements, then you might have some regression, some like system requirements like the performance, the usability, the devices. You can have it grouped in different ways. Some people actually group these by sprint. They'll have sprint 1 requirements in one big section. Other people will do it this way, and then what they'll do is they go into the planning board view and they'll actually group it by release and sprint. So, for example, I can look in my backlog and I can see all my new requirements right here. I'll just turn off to make it a bit smaller. So these are sorry, the screen's a little fuzzy. These are all the requirements we just had, and you can now say, well, let's look at my different releases. So what's going to be in version 1? So let's group them by release. And we'll put, for example, in release 1, we're going to do logging in, logging out, creating a book, and editing a book, creating an author. But let's say editing an author is a version 2 requirement. So I'll put these into release 1. And then if you actually look at the release, you can drill down one level further, and you can think, well, in sprint 1, we'll do the log in, the log out, and maybe the creating the book, and that's all we're doing in sprint 1. And then we'll do these 2 in sprint 2. So you can decide how you're going to plan out the work. And so what we'll do for right now is we'll just write some test cases for these. but in real life you might want to write them for all of them. So we've got our requirements. The next thing we'll do is look at test cases. And depending on your test cases, if you're starting from scratch, you may not have any test cases anywhere. So in which case, there's an option in this particular system, but not every test management tool would have it. So it depends what you have available. But you can go in here and just say, create test case directly from the requirement. So I can go in here and say, I want to create test cases directly from these, like that. And that's going to create 3 test cases, one for each of them. And again, that's making it one-to-one, which may not be the way you want it. Otherwise, what you'll do is go into the test case module, create your test cases, and then link them up afterwards. So it just depends on what makes the most sense. So for example, we've got a test case here called the ability to create a new book, which is generated from that requirement. And so we can say, test that I can create a new book, like that. And we could even say that we're not going to test the login here. We're going to have a precondition precondition, the user is already logged in, like that, for example. So that's our test case. Test I can create a new book. User's logged in. And what we'll do is we'll go in right here and we'll just create a couple of steps. And depending on the type of testing you're doing, if it's someone who's very familiar with the application, you can write very high-level steps, like, for example, create, log in, create a new user, fill in the author, fill in the name of the book, fill in the ISBN, whatever it is you're filling in. If it's a user that doesn't know the application, if it's a formal UAT that you have to do by law, that the end users, for example, in a hospital, you've got some nurses who have to use this system and prove they can use it, then you might have to write test steps that are almost like the instruction manual. So that's sort of something to think about, who the end user is going to be. So for example, here it might be, I'll assume we know the application pretty well, we're logged in, so we're going to click on the book management, your navigation option. And what will happen is the book list appears, displayed like that. Okay, and the second step will be enter the name of the book, the name, genre, and author of the book, and click. We said it's insert, yeah. And expected result will be the book is inserted, like that. So that's a 2-step test case. You could break it down to more steps if you want, make the insert a separate thing. You could also add a verification description saying once it's inserted, make sure that the book actually is created, make sure all the fields match. If your testers know to do that every time, maybe you don't need to write that down, that's up to you. But that's a very simple test case. It does, if you go back here, it covers that one requirement, which is the ability to create a book. It doesn't necessarily test anything else, but in real life you could go into requirements and say, well, this also does test effectively the log in and log out, because I'm going to be logged in first, so I could in theory add that as something else it might cover. So you can have a requirement that has many test cases. You could have a test case that can test a whole bunch of different features. Might be a regression test, some old features, and it tests some new stuff. So that's something to think about as well. So that's my test case written against my requirement. And then the other thing you'll then want to do is run the test case. Now, before we run the test case, in this particular tool that we have support for what are called test sets or test suites. Those are ways of grouping test cases. In a project where you only have a couple of testers, probably I wouldn't bother. You could just assign the tests directly to someone. But otherwise, when you've got a large number of test cases, I'm going to give a whole bunch to people to run. Then you might want to use a test suite. So they have a whole set of things they're going to run. And then you can tell them the specific order. So just to show you that, I'll go in and do that. But in many cases, it might be overkill. So we'll call it release 1, cycle testing on IE. Let's just say something like that. So I'll hit save. There's my test set, and I'm going to add a test case to it. And in real life, I would add more than one test case. Let me add this one, test that I can create a new book. Now, before I run this test, I've made a mistake. I've actually forgotten to do something. I described my preconditions as being logged in, but it would be nice if I actually had that steps in there. So one thing you can do on some tools, I think HPQC can do it also, if you're familiar with that tool, is you can take like a login test case and you can actually embed that as a pre-step in your main test case. So let's go ahead and do that one as well. So we'll go into the login step, and this is our test case for actually logging in. So tests that we can log in successfully. Okay, and it's got the description from here, from the original requirement, so that's good. And we're going to add a test step. And the test step will basically describe this piece, the logging in. So we'll go in here and we'll say log in to the application using the, actually let's step back, click on the login link. The login page appears like this, and then we'll have a second one which is the user enters the username and password and click submit, for example. One thing we can also do is actually define parameters to send through, but I won't do that this time. So you could actually have a login and password be sent through. Let's save. Okay, so there's our test case. And if we now go back to our original test case, which was the creating a book, we can now put this in as a precondition that you have to actually do. So let's go into add step, but insert link. We want to put it in front of the other one. So we'll do it right there. Test that we can log in, hit add. And now it puts it as a link. So we've got a hyperlink so that we now know that you can log in, and then you're going to create the book and hit submit. Any questions? So that makes sense? Yes?
Why would you pick adding it as a linked test case rather than putting it into your test set?
Well, so rather than having a test set with an order?
Yeah, test set with 2 test cases, you've got 1 test case inside.
It depends. You could do it that way. The main difference I would think is, are you always going to be using that other test step before this one? So are you always going to be logging in and then creating a book? Or could you be doing log in, then do something else, and do something else, and then create a book? If the latter is the case, I would use a test set, and I would then put them in the test set in the specific order. Because when you put it into this, you're basically saying it's a precondition. It's something that always makes up this test case. The idea is you've got a test case, and you're going to have bits that are reused in other test cases. Rather than having repeating functionality in every test case, you make it a single piece that you're using as a component. And then if you change it in one place, it updates everywhere. If, on the other hand, you've got a lot of tests and you're composing them into a specific, like a playlist, but that playlist may vary, then the test set approach, I think, is better. But there's not an exact answer. It just depends a little bit on. Generally, things like log in, log out, things that are always going to be done, you would do as a link. Things that are going to change, like testing an ERP system, creating a new purchase request, getting the invoice, getting the quote, sharing the purchase order, receiving the goods, committing the funds. That's where a test set could be used, because you're going to go through a specific set of actions, but you might test it in different ways, with or without a purchase order and things. So that's our test case, and then now we've got the test case. Close that. We'll go into the test set view. And as I mentioned, in this project with this many test cases, i.e. 2, you wouldn't use a test set in real life. You would just simply run the test case. But to show you that you could do that, and if you wanted to add the other test cases, you could do that. You could have the login be its own test case. And perhaps you want to check login and log out actually work separately before you do the other test case. So we could even put it in, just as an example, in here, and you can then put it above. So now you're testing the login prior to doing the creation as a separate test case, which is what Simon was asking about.
Are those fields above configurable? Like type, creator, can I create my own custom field?
Yep, you can create your own custom fields for sure. Yes, these are the ones you see here are the standard fields, but you can create as many custom fields as you need as well. The type in this case is specifically as a manual automated test. If you want a type that describes the business type, the type of test it is logically, that's where you use a custom field. And to do that, it's very easy. You go into administration, and for example, a custom field you might want to do is what browser is this test set for example, because you may decide that each test set is going to be browser specific. And maybe you don't, maybe you reuse them, that's up to you. But let's say we're going to do that. It's a good question. So custom field, you go in here, you say, okay, let's add a list of browsers, and we can use that same browser list on the requirements page, because you might want to say, well, can the login page work on all browsers? Maybe some pages are only designed to work on Firefox and Chrome, but not IE. So that's up to you. You can reuse a list on different fields, on different types of thing in the system. So browsers, and add value. I'm just going to create IE, Firefox, and apologies for not putting in Edge. I'll just do Safari and then Chrome. So there we go. And then once you define your list of values, you then go into the custom properties section. And for that, we were on test sets, so I'll add it to test sets. You can add everything in the system. You could add it to requirements, to test cases, to an individual test step as well. It's entirely up to you. We'll do it to test step. And then we add it, and we're going to call it browser. And if it's a single select, like we're going to run this test set on a single browser, we'd make it a list. If it's something like where I want to say, well, we can run these tests on different browsers, then I might make it a multi-list. That's up to you. I'll keep it singular. Is it required? Is it not? And is there a default value? So we'll leave it as optional. So that's added. Go back to my test set. And right here. And now instead of just saying we're going to test it on the IE, I can actually formally track it here that it's going to be IE like that. So there we go. So now we've got a test set. And when we come to part 2 of tonight, I'm going to be going through the automated testing. We're going to use the same test set and we're going to run it through automated. So for now, we'll leave it as manual. And what I'll do is I'm going to assign it to Fred, a different user, and I hit save. And I'm also going to tell him we're using sprint 1. I can also set a plan date if I want. So we'll do it. So we'll say we're going to get it done by 8:30 and we'll hit save. And in real life, there's an email system turned on. Fred will get an email and would log in and actually go ahead and do it. So that's very simple of how we would set up a test set. And if we pretend we're Fred, and he will see on his My page, let me go into IE. And so I'm going to log in to the same server using IE. And I'm logged in as Fred. Perfect. I'm actually really logged in. And if you go to Fred, he'll see in his My page, he'll see his assigned test sets. And in real life, you wouldn't have quite as much as this. This is our demo server, so we preloaded with everything for a demo. But what if I do, if I change it to the current project, which is DCAS project, and I say only show me this project, it will basically be a lot easier to see what's going on, because I can say current project only, and there you go. Now it's a bit more manageable. Because there you go, there's our test set right here. It's the only one. So I'll go and hit play, and this is where we actually would do our testing. Now I've got a single test case, but in real life it could be more than one. We do connect to build servers if we have one. So if I'm using Jenkins, this drop-down list won't be empty. Every time Jenkins or TeamCity or any build tool, TFS, if you're doing Microsoft stuff, runs, it generates a new build. It automatically reports the build back into SpiraTest, and then you can actually tie your result to a particular build. So you could say I'm running against build X from Sprint 1, in Release 1, from TeamCity or Jenkins or TFS. And there's our test case. And this is the view, and this is the list of test cases. On the left, there are 2 test cases, which are in bold, and there's test steps, which are underneath. And then we have the actions to the right. And this particular application that we use is mobile responsive. Other tools may or may not be, but you can use it therefore on a cell phone or on a tablet, which is nice. We also have 2 other views. This is our split view, where you've got the steps, and you can navigate like this, interactively on the left. We've also got a table view. Fortunately, a lot of people do still use Excel for testing, and they like this view because it looks more like a spreadsheet in that it's a big column and a big set of rows, and you can pass and fail like that. So that's another option. And there's a mini view, which is what it looks like on a cell phone, because it goes down to about this size, and it runs on a cell phone, fully responsive. But it also can embed the application in an iframe. So since our application is web-based, I could go, rather than alt-tabbing, I could go in here and put the URL in like this, and run it in an iframe, which is nice if you only got one screen like I have today. It's also nice because I'll be recording this on video, and we'll be able to record the whole thing, which is nice. So let's go ahead and do our testing. So we're going to go log in. So test we can log in. So let's go ahead and log in. Librarian, and I won't necessarily bore you with doing the actual testing, but that's what you would do. This side, and you click on set passes. Step 2, passes, we did that already. Test I can create a book. Preconditions is logged in. So I did the login already, so I'll skip through that. Now we get to the book management. Click on the book. That's good. Click on the book list is displayed. That's good. Book is inserted. And there's the book. So we'll go here, and we're basically going to go put our book in. So, new book by Adam. And let's pretend we have an error, because obviously it's boring if everything passes. So I'll hit insert. Now, pretend that gave me a system error. It was a horrible error. The screen went red, didn't do what it's supposed to. And so let's go ahead and fail it. Now, a screenshot's always nice. So we'll take a screenshot. I'll just do print screen and paste it like that. There's our screenshot. And the actual result, because obviously the screenshot does tell you a lot, but not necessarily everything. And this is where the mini view is a little bit small. The split view might be a bit easier, but just...
the full screen.
Oh yeah, look at that. See? I forgot about that. So there's a full screen editor, so you can go in, and we'll just paste it again. There you go, and I will type above it, right here. When I clicked on the insert button, I got a horrible error.
This only does your UI though, right?
What's that?
This only does your UI. If you want to actually if you actually wanted to get like the calls and everything, you actually have to do it on the browser.
Well, this is the manual testing. So this is just
Yes.
right. So this is whatever I was testing. If I wanted to capture something, I could paste anything in. But it's really just giving you instructions and taking your answer. It's not interacting with your environment in any way, including the browser calls.
No, so I understand. So what you're showing us is that Inflectra has a way for you to emulate through here, what your application looks like. Like, it's an iframe. Well, it's a lightweight browser. That's what you have.
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
Right, yeah, all we're doing here is, in fact, the only reason we have this is because most people use it in this mode, which looks more like this. What happens is if I have a single screen, I end up doing a lot of alt-tabbing. That's all. It's just to prevent that. It's no magic. It's just the browser's iframe, you're right. It does nothing specific.
So you can do that in Spec, you can do...
Inside that iframe, no, because iframes are limited. If you have it in another tab or a desktop application,
Right.
an iOS app.
I don't know, actually. Could you do it? If I do F12, it's probably going to do the whole window. Unfortunately, because of the way I works.
You can definitely inspect the contents inside the iframe. You can inspect the DOM inside the iframe. But your network tab, for instance, if you're looking at calls, would be everything you're doing on the page. So
Including SpiraTeam, yeah.
As well as...
It's not much.
Yeah, so what I would probably
you
do...
You could do a filter in the network tab
Right.
by domain.
That's true. Yeah, probably if you were doing that, I would say have two screens and use the split view. Then you'd have the app on one screen and then SpiraTeam
That's
on the
why
other.
lots of people use tablets as well. Because they've got their main screen would be the testing the application, and the tablet.
Oh, that's a good point.
The tablet is for actually having SpiraTeam on.
Right, and it doesn't then pollute it with the network traffic. That's a good point. So thanks. So we'll hit fail, and we'll log a defect too, because this is not meant to happen. So we'll log a bug, which is bug on the book creation screen. Imagine it was a 500 error or something. And then we'll hit fail, bug. That's okay. We have custom fields for our defect. We don't. We also don't need to put the description of the defect in. It will pre-populate that for us automatically. If there was a defect already, it will show it to you right here in this section, which is no instance are currently linked. That means there are no other. This is the first time we've ever found the error on this step. If there were other errors, they would show them right here, and you could avoid a duplicate and just link it. So I'll hit fail. So that's going to fail my step and my case. And because this was the only two test cases I have to do and they're both done, this orange box appears and I can now do finish. So warns me, yep, I'm finishing it. And there's my results. So now if I go back, I'm now the manager back over in Firefox, and if I go to my test sets, what you're going to see here is the fact that we had two test cases. One was the login in isolation, and that passed. And then the combined test, which was logging in and creating a book, failed. And if you click on it right here, you can drill down and see that exactly happened. Like that. One passed, one failed. In real life, you often want to see more detail. We create what's called a test run for each one. I'll just look at the failure, which is right here. And there's going to be your passed, and there's your failure image and your fail step and the description of what actually happened. Now, I didn't write very much. In real life, I'd probably write more than that. You could attach a log file or put much more information than we have here. This is just a simple case for today. The defect is created and linked and logged. So if you go to the defect tracking, it will create a defect in the system. SpiraTeam has its own bug tracking system. It also integrates with Jira, TFS, all the usual suspects as well. So if you're stuck in Microsoft World, it will send over the TFS for development, and then it synchronizes the data back from TFS. So you don't have to necessarily deal with TFS. You could be isolated in your own world. And Jira, the same thing. It will send it to Jira. If you add a comment in Jira, fix it. We get the updates. but you can still do integrated reporting. And now, I won't go through the bug fixing, but you could now triage it, assign it to someone. So I'll just assign it to someone, but then we'll leave it. We won't go any further in the bug tracking process, but certainly you could. Hit save. I need to fill in some information. Start date, 5 hours, and I think that's all I need to fill out. Or maybe a comment. Hi. Oh, hi. Okay. Hi, Joe. Please fix ASAP. The team is waiting or something. Was it priority? Okay. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Hit save. It's now going to email Joe. He gets an email. He fixes the bug. We retest it. There's an option in the test run to do a retest, which runs you through the test again. Hopefully all passes. Now you're good. And then for the management who want to make sure everything's looking great on the project, they've got a project dashboard. It already looks like this. We've only got a couple of requirements and some test cases, but we've got our test status now. 1 failed, 1 passed, 1 not run. And if we scroll down, we even have a requirements coverage graph. And so we now have a total of 4 requirements that don't yet have any tests. But also that's across all our sprints. So that's actually okay right now. If we filter it by sprint or release, we only get the ones that we've actually planned on doing. So those ones would disappear. And then you've got the fact that this one test case is linked to 2 requirements. So that's why it shows up as a higher number of failures than it would otherwise. Because it maps back and it weights the test results against the original requirements. So if you go to the requirements view, you can also see specifically which requirements are being impacted by the specific tests. And that's just because the way I set the mapping. I linked that one login test case right here to both creating a book and I think to log in, which was a mistake. And that's why it's showing up there and here. And so it lets you track your requirements against your test cases and make sure you've got complete coverage and there's nothing missing. And we designed SpiraTeam so that you can tie your unit tests. I'm not going to do that today. When we get to section 2, we'll talk about the automation and how you could do integration with API, unit testing, load testing. So this becomes not just your manual test that I just did now, but is your entire test repository. And when you go into the dashboard and reporting, you're seeing the entire testing picture, not just the test that you ran as a manual tester, for example, or exploratory tests. The whole picture can be in here. That's the end of the SpiraTest presentation. Any questions now?
So that's interesting. So we mapped that test case to a failed test case, so it shows them all this failing, even though the logging in was successful.
So what I did is, and again, let's have a look. I created a test case right here, one called logging in, one called creating a book. And if I go into the requirements, what I think I did is, if I go to login, let's have a look.
You added it as a step.
Right, but I think I added it to 2 requirements. I added the test case, 2 tests to the 1 requirement. So when I created the login to system requirement, I inadvertently linked that 1 test case to it, which was a mistake. Because the login, the creating a book has nothing to do with the login requirement. I think I did that when I was on the tab and I was showing how you add and remove stuff. So we just removed that. So now we've got the login is testing the login functionality only. And that should then make it appear as we'd expect, like that. So the login has 1 test case, which verifies that it does log in correctly. The ability to create a book is right here, and that has 1 test case that failed. So the fact that you saw green and red is because I had mislinked the creating a book to the login requirement. And that does happen, unfortunately, when you're doing a demo. And so if you decide that, for example, you create another test case, you would go into the requirement, you'd say, I want to add a new test case to this requirement to be able to support it. For example, creating a book, maybe you have another test which is an edge test that, can you create a book with a really long set of names? Is that a new test case maybe? You can then create that and then link it in. And then you have 4 or 5 different tests that all have to pass. When we get into automation, we can actually create automated tests that also tie to this requirement as well.
So how easy is it to create custom reports? So you have that dashboard view. So how easy is it to create a customized graph?
So customized graphs currently, you can basically take any of the fields. So for example, the standard fields or the custom fields, you can pick any of them. For example, let's say we don't have any priorities. Let's choose the test status and maybe the person who wrote the test case. And you can graph any of the fields against each other. So if you add a field, you can do simple XY graphing and time phase graphing. If you want to do something that's more, much more customized than that, and you can export these out, we don't have it yet. We're going to be adding a SQL-based graphing engine too. So right now you can basically pick fields and graph them. like this. So for example, requirements, I want to choose my priority against my sprint.
If I wanted to do like a pie chart.
I hate pie charts. We have a religious war about pie charts.
We have donut charts for the first time ever
Okay.
in this version of 5.2. It will be circles.
Yes, there you go, like that.
Okay.
Adam, I think one of you let us have donuts.
Yeah, because pie chart. The problem with pie charts they've found is that people don't realize the area. They're not sure if the area or the linear size is the actual comparison, so people tend to get confused. So we've compromised on donuts. And if you actually go into a more populated project, this one's a bit empty. There's a lot more graphs and charts. And one of the things that we're doing is I've been persuaded to allow us to have more. It's like a test run graph. We got a spline graph. We're going to be adding more donut graphs and lots more bar graphs. So we do have a lot, and we're going to be adding more graphs. But the other thing we're looking at is having someone to be able to do a SQL-based, where you could actually write a query, do a group by, do an order by, and do some really sophisticated stuff. But you can right now take any of the fields and graph them against each other in each of the different types in the system, for the most part.
You can also take data.
Yes.
Export to Excel.
Yes, that's true too.
And then do your charts in Excel.
And the other thing that we often get people asking for is they want to be able to prove to someone, like, unfortunately we are still in some ways a paper-based world, but we don't want to work in paper, but we have to generate paper. So for example, you need to have a requirements traceability report because someone needs that somewhere. And so you could go in here and you can run that, and then you can generate that. You can filter by, let's say, I only want the requirements that are planned for, let's say, release 1. That's fine. And I only want the test cases that are perhaps approved or ready for test, say. So we can generate a report like that, and we can choose the format, and we have a custom report writer where you can actually generate custom documents and change which fields are displayed and how it's put together. So this is an example of a PDF-based requirements traceability, like that. And you've got your test cases, your requirements, and we're showing requirements numbers. If you wanted to show a requirements name, for example, you could go into the report format and you can basically change the way it looks. You can change to run it in Excel, for example. The other thing people often want is a requirements detail report, which is all the requirements written out in long form and the test cases. And so that's something that often you'd give to a client in a kind of government world, or in DC, you often have to give something to a prime contractor who gives it to the government. And so whenever you need to generate paper, for example, we want to have a list of requirements, we want to have the change history. We don't want to show them all our tasks, those are internal. We want to show them the bugs, the link requirements, the documents, maybe the source code, no, we don't want to show them that. And we don't want to, we test code, which we do want to show them. So we can pick and choose, and then we'll just run the whole thing. And this is where you can generate a big requirements sign-off sheet with all the tests, all the runs, all the information. And if you think about doing this in Excel or Word by hand, I mean, people would spend weeks putting this all together. And when I used to work at Sapient in Arlington, we did that.
Pie charts. What do you want on the pie charts?
I was curious because one of the things that, so it hurts my heart to still see this. I think it's very impressive that you have it, but I am trying to move away from this kind of documentation.
Oh, you mean this stuff?
Yes.
We don't like it.
I think it's very impressive that you can actually do this, and it's actually I think you should really applaud yourself in terms of this is one of the neatest formatted ones I've seen. It's very clean. So I think you really should applaud yourself on the fact that you have this. What I meant to say in terms of I threw pie charts out there. I'm also not a huge fan of pie charts, but I was just curious in terms of showing in terms of it'd be good to see in terms of a pie chart in terms of the amount of testing effort that you've been through. In terms of you've gone through sprint so far and you have done this much effort in terms of trying to verify certain features in a certain way. So pie charts are a good way to show that kind of effort, in my opinion. So that's why I was curious, because I asked about the custom tags because what you've shown is very it's very basic, which is good for in terms of just getting people to accept that there's an easier way of doing just that basic kind of categorization. But the next step would then be okay, so this requirement is actually around this overarching feature. So we have in my mind, authentication is actually, or authentication lies underneath security,
Sure.
higher level sort of feature or category. So being able,
The components to is built in. There's something called components per project. You can define the different components, and then everything like every requirement, test case, incident, it's all under that component. Has a component, so that you could segregate your reporting by component. Like security.
Yeah, so people have like different names for it. Like they'll call it category, they'll call it component, they'll call it, or they use things like just tags. Or like in other frameworks like Kubernetes and stuff, you can create these higher level categories with tags, concept of tags. And so then you can also say, in addition to the test cases that you've created, you can say like maybe down login, log out, like logging in, logging out, cookie management, session management, all this one stuff. It's all underneath security.
Right.
So then you can see in terms of like which features you then have adapted these additional considerations to, like security, performance. You mentioned browser, so then you can actually just say like mobile, like you could say like just I don't see like if it's like UI feature, but you can say like how mobile is it? So is it just only on your like personal computer, or do you also have true like mobile support to it? Like you have iOS, do you
Right.
tablets and stuff like that. So it's more it's like next steps.
Right, because one of the things we do have is, and again, it's hard to see on a small project because I already showed two or three levels that this is the login one requirement with a one pass, whereas this is the authentication kind of again. Reality will probably be bigger than that. Maybe security could be under. So that would then show that there's two overall tests for authentication as a whole. And if you go up to the functional list, you've got 3, which is all these test cases, and it shows you that roll-up view. And if you go to a bigger project that has potentially a little more data in it, like this one, you can go up to the top of the hierarchy. You've got this more complex hierarchy, and if I show, let's say 50 rows, like that, you can move to the top of the tree, and you're going to see there's a total of 22 tasks, of which 41% is passed. And so this is rolling up all those subcomponents up to the top. And we don't use they're not pie charts, but we use this little indicator where it's green, moves from left to right, and you have red, and orange, and yellow. So where you see green, it's passed, where there's red, it's a true failure, and orange means it's a borderline warning case, and a yellow is a block, you can't actually execute it, and gray is stuff that hasn't yet been tested. So you have that rolling up the tree, for example. And then the same thing on the bar chart, you have typically, that's your progress graph, but typically what people are interested in is like the requirements test coverage. This graph, you want to see this obviously going up, and you want to avoid this not covered. That's areas that have no tests. There's no coverage, there's no unit test, no automated test, there's no manual test. There's nothing testing, at least nothing we know of anyway, which is an area you'd want to investigate. And then defect counts, where the defects are linked and stuff like that. And the other thing you'll be able to see is all the tests outstanding. So if you have testers working around the clock in different time zones, you can see the progress of all your testers, what they're doing. And if someone's sick, you can just reassign the test case to someone else, and they hand it off as well. That's something we added recently.
Where the next thing I was going to say, like based off that, then, so where I feel like pie charts could be very helpful is that you're looking at a specific like feature, and you want to see like what is sort of the breakdown of the different text executions I have, and then if you then from that, if you like click on a specific, if you click on a category, so let's say like it looks like you have a bunch of manual sort of test executions, and you click that component, click that section of the pie chart, you then can see the graph of then what's like the time covered. So in terms of like effort to time, results and feedback to then the number of issues that you find. So then that way you can like, so because a lot of people assume that, oh, you have a bunch of manual testing, that is a lot more testing effort. And sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. Because sometimes you might just have manual testing effort that's when things are too difficult to automate.
Right.
So it's not, it would take someone 5 seconds to do it, but if you want to automate, it's going to take you like 4 hours. So that's kind of like a nice, more like just information that you can give in terms of testing effort. And then if you like some people like are like, oh, you only have like a little bit of automation, that's bad. But then if you went to go and drill down into it and see like that little bit actually may expand 5 hours because you're running like a whole bunch of things or you're running very long tests. Like I don't really believe like an automated test needs to run very long, like very short, because sometimes you need it to run long if you want to see something happen. That
Because the computer time is cheap.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Right, different permutations. You can run hundreds of logins, hundreds of passwords to try different.
so yeah, things like that. So so I guess that's just me spinning off ideas. So that'd be great. So for me, like that's I understand, like if you just have a pie chart by itself, it's kind of like blah. But if you're able to like have the charts be interactive, which I'm sort of starting to see that through your graphs, but then that could be like another neat features that you could have really interactive.
That's a good idea.
Graphs.
Right.
To connect them to other graphs and to other information that you can get.
Right, because the graphs right now have two basic tooltips. What would be really cool is if you could like hover over it, it will pop up and say, this is the key data that ties into that data element. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, the drilling down, basically click on say not run and execute
Right.
instances that drill you down into a different view, which might be a line chart or a bar chart.
Right.
And then you can just keep
Yeah, I mean right now it just drops through and filters you, but right.
Or might be like a web of different data connected.
Right. Yeah, right now it just applies a filter, but it doesn't do that inline to the graph, that's true.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Do you know anything that does that kind of thing now? In the testing space, I know there are.
Yeah.
Yes and no. Like so for like performance, like Danish has something like that.
Okay.
So it's having really engagement. I guess like that's the new feature a lot of people are really kind of looking for. Like I haven't made anything in an automated fashion, but whenever I make graphs, I make sure I support graphs with graphs and graphs and grids. To give that kind of drill down information for people. So really good to see it in an automated fashion.
So you're talking about like the whole point of all that is to analyze like how much have we done,
How
what's
far
the
down the
quality
testing?
looking.
How far have we gone down the rabbit hole?
Right.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about automated testing. And there's lots of different types of automated testing. There's API testing, load testing, unit testing, function security testing, various other things. Just for today, we're going to talk about UI testing. And there are tools that are obviously you've already heard of, like Selenium, which are open source tools, which allow you to do it through code. There are some other tools you may have heard of, which are more GUI-driven tools. The tool we're going to show today is our automation tool, and it integrates with Selenium for playing back through the web. It also integrates with Appian for mobile, and it provides a framework for doing test automation. And it runs in different modes. It runs in a mode where it records everything in JavaScript for programmers. It also can work in a mode where it does everything in a table view. And that's what I'll be doing today, just to sort of show you that piece of it. But I can only scratch the surface. So this is the application right here. And it can run on its own, but it's most useful when it integrates with the test management solution. So you have all that reporting centralized. And so we just integrate by putting the URL to your server in, login and password. Do that. And then once you've done that, you can go into the file and we're going to create a new test. And for today, I'm just going to go and create a simple test that will replicate what I did manually, but now does it automatically. So we'll go into our DCAS project and we'll choose, let's have a look, we'll choose that test case, the test that I can create a new book. And there's our steps right here. And we're going to choose to do web testing. So we'll choose the bottom one. And we're going to start using Firefox because I've got that ready to go. But you can use the other browsers too. And it will play back, as you notice, through Selenium, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Phantom.js, which is a headless browser and it'll play through Source Labs, Browser Stack, any of the cloud platforms also. So we'll just choose Firefox for now though. Hit play.
I have many questions about that.
You do?
I do.
Okay.
How do you keep yourself updated?
With Selenium? I have to ask our developers.
How do you keep
Constant
yourself
I don't.
No, we have two guys in Russia who work on this particular product. Constant updates, I think, would be the short answer.
But then how good is it with backwards compatibility though?
What we've done is we've released major new versions with support for the current version of Appium and Selenium. Selenium's been pretty stable. Appium, I know we had the break with iOS with the XCUO'd. So we have a version that supports UI automation, a version that supports XC, I don't remember the acronyms, XUI code, the new Apple. So Appium has been more of a problem in all honesty. The support for Selenium has been much more stable. And so for Appium, we typically release updates, both patch updates mid-cycle as well.
So are you expecting the users, okay, so non-sauce happen, but are you expecting the users to run this locally on their machine or against a non-Selenium grid that they've set up?
typically when you're building the when we get to using it, when you're building the tests, you're building them locally, recording. When you're playing them back, it's up to you. You can do either. Plays back independent either way. The reason why you want to record them locally is in order to do the automatic recording, it typically needs to access your browser and be able to capture the real-time events to build the test. Once you've created the test, the playback could be through any of the above. Then it doesn't matter. So we'll choose the table non-scriptless language for right now. And so everything's going to be put into this table view. Okay, so hold on. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to start recording. So let's get back to the application. And I hit the record button. And it brings up this recording dialog right here. I'm going to click on the login button. And I click login, you're going to see it record the login event right here. And I'm going to do the same thing we did manually. I'll do librarian. I'll do librarian again. And I'll hit login. It's recorded the login steps. I'm going to click on the book management. I'm going to click on create new book. And I'm going to enter Adam's book 1. And I'm going to change the genre to a different one.
Is it picking it from the label or is it picking it from the actual HTML object?
HTML object.
By ID or class?
We'll talk about that in a sec. So that's a good question, and I'm going to hold, just so I get this recorded, and then but these are fantastic questions, and I'm going to ask them. So I insert, and I'm going to verify my book. So we'll do Control and 1. Oops, wrong. Sorry, I'm over the wrong cell. We'll do that again over this one. Verify the text. Okay. Log out. So I'm back to my starting point. Hit finish, and it says a new recording is available. And I'm going to hit insert here. Now this is all in table view. It could also be a JavaScript version. JavaScript would look like this, but code, I can show you one that looks like that as well. The table view consists of a cell. The first cell is what is this row? Is it an action? An action means we're going to do something. Then you pick an object, and the objects come from this object tree on the left. So you can expand and collapse them here as well. And all the objects are basically pointers to something. This is a web application, so they're DOM elements. If this was mobile, they'd be mobile controls. They could be REST API calls. They could be SOAP API calls. If this was a Windows legacy app, they could be Microsoft WinForm.NET form controls. They could be Java component. They could be Swing. Whatever it is on your UI that you need to access, it's going to show them here as objects. And we have what are called locators. And the locator is based on the object. For web, we use XPath or CSS, either. For mobile, it's going to be, they keep changing the names, but it's UI Automation Index on Query Path on Apple, and the equivalent for Android. For desktop, it tends to be the automation path in Windows or the Java Swing path. But whatever it is, we have a methodology for each technology, and it's a unique way of finding it. So if there's something, it's a different place on the screen, it still finds it. It doesn't rely on the text. It's designed to be as robust. Whichever object it is, it's going to appear here. So we could choose the object. We then choose the action. The action will depend on the object. So that's a hyperlink. So I'll have do click, and that's pretty much all I need. If I was to enter in a, for example, text box, which I'll go find from my list, which is down here. Let's say the name box. I would have more options like do set text. I can just type it, do set text. It will give me the parameters I can fill in. So a string, some value. So what you saw was when I first did it, it recorded it, it built this out for me. That's recording. I could also just learn objects on the page and then create them in the grid. The current version of the tool has this grid view, which is a simple linear list of actions. The next version coming out in a week or two is going to also have the ability to do loops, conditions, and data maps, which is something, so you can take this whole set of steps and say, run it through 100 logins. The code version we have, which in JavaScript already has that, but we're going to make this version have the same full set of functionality. So that's a very simple recording. I just added two things at the end. I'm going to comment them out because I've logged out already, so they won't actually work. And just to show you the playback before we go into the Object Spy tool, let's just at least do a playback and make sure it works. So hit play, and the playback is going to push the events back to the browser. The recording, because it's going to be listening to what you're doing, it needs to be a physical browser local. Playback's just sending the standard requests. They could be the local browser, it could be Source Labs, it could be Selenium Grid, anything that you want. We just send through the standard commands. This is being run locally on my machine. The other thing you might want to do is have SpiraTeam kick it off and report back. That's easy enough. You just say save to Spira, and that will save it back into our test management tool, and you can now schedule and run it from within SpiraTeam. So back in that tool we were first using, back over here, that test case that I had at the beginning, we could now run it automatically. We can tell it to run on Selenium Grid on 100 machines, go do it. And we then get the reporting in one place, in one web view. So that's quite nice. The other thing we can do back in the automation tool is look at the application in a bit more detail, because when I recorded some of that stuff, and if you're familiar with web testing, you'll know that the challenge is going to be with grids of data and things where data changes. So when I recorded this grid, what was I actually recording? When I verified that book, was I verifying the 16th row? Was I verifying by the ID value? What was I actually recording? And so the way Rapise works is every object has an XPath pointer. And so sometimes it will find the XPath very easily. For example, this here is using the, if I put it to Notepad, it's putting it that. So it's using the ID of the control. That's pretty reliable, unless you change the page. Whereas the book management, the cell I looked, this one here, that book I verified, if I look at the XPath from that, it's position based. That's not so reliable because that's the 16th row, second cell. If I resort my grid, add a book before it, it's going to throw an error, and the failure is not really true. It's not failed, it's just not found it. So we have some more advanced tools in Rapise to do that. So we go back into the recorder. I have logged in, and we have also a spy tool, which lets you get a snapshot of the DOM and track. And so let me track, a bit like the browser DOM tool works. And what I can do is I can then look at an object, and it will give me suggested XPath. It gives me, it's hard to see on the screen unfortunately, but it will give you a CSS path first of all, right here. That's CSS, using a standard CSS set of selectors. It gives you the same XPath we had already, which is the index based. It will also let you choose one based on text, on the grid. So here's one where it's trying to find it based on the ID of the book. That says, get the table cell, normalize the text value, where that is 16. So I take that, put that into my testing tool at the top, and so I get the book with ID 16. I can just get its parent row, get the cell next to it, test that. Now I've got my right book. I'm doing it based on a fixed ID that's reliable. I can now learn that as an object and use it in my test grid. So you can use this tool to use what you know of the application to change how it's learning. You can also tell Rapise to learn using any of these XPath options automatically. So when I use the option to click on something, there's an option in the settings to say use this version, or this version, or one of these. So depending on the application or what you're recording, you will pick up the one that you know is reliable, basically. So that's that's the object spy and how it works behind the scenes. And you can put dynamic queries in here as well. The other thing you can do, if I hit cancel, I need to put that in, is when you've got an object in the tree, you can also do subquerying. So you can take a root object like the table, and you can just do a query relative to it. So you can learn the table, or any object in here, for example, one of these web objects like the cell, and you can do a subquery against that. So do get children, get a CSS path, or an XPath. So for the XPath, you could do this, and say, relative to that object, get me the row, get me this table, get me the one which has ID equals blah, blah, blah. So you haven't got to learn every single object as a discrete object. You could just load the root objects, the main grid, the main UI elements, and then you can just subquery from those as well. Or you could decide to learn every single thing. If you're working with developers who know what they're doing, maybe you learn the main objects, let them code away. If you're dealing with a functional user and the UI is simple, you could just learn all the main elements. They could assemble it in a grid and then not have to worry too much about what's going on behind the scenes. But that's not what's unfortunately possible in complex apps. So that's a quick overview. Is there anything else I should show? Or I can show it running through SpiraTest, but if you run through SpiraTest, it basically plays it and it reports back into SpiraTest as a test run and updates the graphs. If you have any questions?
So you can organize your objects, right?
Correct. That's right. It does it by default based on the window name. So for web apps, it's taking the window name, or in the mobile, it'd be the form name. You could actually change them all. This is all being saved as a giant JSON file behind the scenes, so you can do what you like with it. It's just a way of grouping it. By default, it takes the window name as a default grouping. There are also some global objects. So for example, if you want to interact natively with Android, iOS, or the Selenium API, or the Appium API, there's some lower level utility objects. You can also convert this to a load test. So not Dynatrace currently, but one of the other tools, NeoLoad, we can actually play this and have it turn into a load test. And what it does is it plays it once, opens up the load test recorder at the same time, captures the protocol traffic, finishes this test, closes the load test recorder, and now you've got a load test. And what it will do is if you have subtests and scenarios in here, it sends those through as container names. So the load test has a series of discrete containers, which can be useful. We can also retest data from a spreadsheet, database, file system access is all here too. And then there's also a web service testing module. And the web service testing module is a bit like what you might have in Postman or other REST or SOAP tools. The main advantage here is if you're doing it with a UI test, you could have it open up a web page, send an AJAX call using REST, check the data on the screen, make a change in the UI, make a REST call, make sure the API AJAX data is the same. So you can do a combination of the two. If you're just doing REST testing on its own, maybe you use SOAP UI or something. But when you've got a combination of UI and the web testing, that can be particularly useful, we found. And I can only scratch the surface, unfortunately, in 20 minutes. But we are doing some webinars. My colleagues in Russia who helped develop this tool, they're actually doing a webinar this Thursday, Taya, right? On
Yes, Thursday.
complex data-driven testing?
It's data-driven.
Testing, yes. They also did a webinar on how to test MS Office 365 in the cloud across multiple time zones when Azure is updated different zones in different versions, and how the challenges of doing that. And that was pretty crazy in many ways. But they know this a lot more than I do. They're out there doing automation all the time. The other thing we have another neat feature which is an OCR reader. So if you have an image and you want to extract text from it, you can actually grab text from an image too. It uses Google Tesseract to do the actual OCR, but it grabs the image from the UI element, sends it to Tesseract, and then extracts the text, and now it's available for verification in a test case. Well, thank you.
Thank you.